Welcome to Activate the Youth Vote. My name is Sanan Qasim. I'm the proud founder of a nonprofit called the Qasim Legacy Foundation, and I love working with our elected officials to bridge our youth and our communities together. And today I've got three amazing youth panelists with me for our fourth Activate the Youth Vote panel discussion. Our goal is to mobilize and energize voters across the country. And we're doing that by talking about issues that are prevalent to our generation and to our humanity. There's no doubt that 2020 is much different. And while there's polarization in our politics, I like to say that we're going to show the adults on national TV how it's done to have a respectful conversation, even though we come from different ends of the political spectrum. And so I am so excited for this panel, especially because it is the last push before November 3rd. So if you haven't already, make sure to vote. Make sure you have a plan to vote and make sure that you follow through on that plan. Not only yourself, but encourage your family, neighbors, colleagues, friends, everyone you know to vote. The four of us are ambassadors for the vote. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. You can go to the many voter resources that are available. And at the end, on November 3rd, we'll be happy to see the high voter turnout and an increase in our youth voter participation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our three incredible panelists. First, we have Alex Drehos. Alex is the international president of Key Club International. And for those who don't know, that is the largest service organization run by students in the world. And so he oversees over 1,000 chapters of Key Club in over 38 countries. Alex, tell us a little bit more about your civic leadership and your advocacy and how you're encouraging others to vote during this time.
Of course, thanks for the introduction. So I'm Alex Drehos, the Key Club International president, which means I oversee or lead, I guess, over 200,000 students in over 5,000 clubs in 38 countries, which is an honor. And so what I try to do is help mobilize them to serve their communities in the best way possible. And so I spend a lot of time on that work, trying to get students, again, to help their communities in a nonpartisan way. So that takes up a large majority of my time, but I also serve on the State of Iowa Youth Advisory Council, where I advocate for legislation pertinent to youth. And so that is a nonpartisan organization of about 20 students. And so in the past, I have worked to advocate for policies regarding rural broadband and making sure that people have internet. I am currently working on automatic voter registration legislation, and then also felon voting rights and things like that. And so that's kind of what I do in my life. I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And to get out the vote, I think one of the things I've been doing is, number one, making a voting plan, which is very important. I'm sure we'll talk about it sometime today. So I've been trying to do that. I've been encouraging my friends and family to do the same as well. And then I've also been working with some campaigns that are in my area and trying to get out the vote that way. And so this election is very important to me. I actually voted for the first time about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So on top of all the other things I have done, the most, I guess, relevant to this conversation is that I am a new voter, which is exciting.
That is definitely something that is a milestone. And so for all of the first time voters, congratulations. And if you haven't voted yet, make sure to vote. And so thank you so much, Alex, for your leadership and for your introduction. Next, we have Carly Goldberg. Carly is the president of the Triangle Debate League. So I know that she helps many students find their voice and their passion. She also attends Duke University, and she interned for the United States Department of Justice, which I definitely want to hear about that cool experience. So Carly, give us a little bit of an introduction on your leadership and what you've been working on as well.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a really big honor. But yeah, like you said, I started, or I'm the current president of the Triangle Debate League. So we are an organization that started about 3 years ago with the goal that if you can teach students, or at least get students exposed to how to have an actual debate, one that has an exchange of communication, one that actually ends in building towards something as opposed to just fighting, you can change the outcome of a lot of these policies that we seem to be stuck on. So we started about 3 years ago. We now operate in 5 Durham schools. And the bills we have our students debate on ranges from everything from domestic to international issues. And for the past year, we've been working on adapting it to meet the COVID needs of the world. So it's been really great to get to actually have that firsthand work with civic engagement in the community. And while I've been there, I've also been studying those impacts of what civic engagement as students has on your long-term civic engagement throughout the rest of your life. So it's one of the reasons I was with the DOJ studying voting rights and the way the government works to protect those, and one that I hope gets to continue on. I think it's been very much activated this election, and I'm hoping we're going to see a long-term legacy of it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carly, for your leadership and everything that you do. I know that Aries is also an incredible youth leader, and as soon as she's able to join back with us, we'll give her an opportunity to introduce herself and her amazing leadership too. And so let's get right into the format for today. This is going to be a great conversation. It's not going to be an interview, but it will be a great conversation amongst our panelists. We're going to be discussing many issues prevalent to voting, prevalent to our country, and to our generation. And so I'm going to address a question at one of our panelists, and then I'll pause for a moment and let the other panelists jump in and expand on their thoughts too. Let's start with Alex. Alex, you brought up making a plan to vote. Well, that's our very first question. How did you and your family make a plan to vote? And of course, how do you encourage others to make sure that they get out the vote too, even if they're under circumstances where it may be limiting?
Of course, yeah. So when I was figuring out how to vote and which way I should vote, I was looking through some of the options. I was looking through mail-in ballots, seeing if I could mail in my vote, early voting. I was also considering the option of in-person voting on election day. So I kind of observed those options. And originally I was going to vote by mail. But then I guess sort of mid-September, my ballot came back and I was like, I think I'll vote in person just because it was the first time, stuff like that. So I voted in person, and that was just kind of my plan there. I also picked a day when I was going to do it, a few weeks ahead of when I could, just so I knew exactly when I was going to do it to make sure that I did vote and I held myself accountable to it. So that's what I did with my voting plan. I figured out kind of where I was going to do it, when I was going to do it, and how I was going to do it. And I think those are the 3 fundamental aspects of a voting plan. For those who want to, I guess, activate the vote, number 1, again, come up with your own voting plan. I cannot stress that enough, especially if you have not voted yet and you're eligible to vote. Please come up with a plan to do so on or before Tuesday. But you can also, again, talk to the people you know, talk to your friends who are 18 or older, talk to your parents, talk to your long lost third cousin. It doesn't matter. But relational organizing and talking to those people that you have relationships with can really get out the vote, and studies have proven that. And if you're not of age, you can still do that, but you also can look at other options to be civically engaged as well, whether that's being a poll worker, registering to vote the second you turn 18, or if you can before, like I know my state, I can register by age 17. So that's also something that's really important, especially for this election, but also elections in the future.
Pre-registering to vote and registering to vote, making sure that everyone is eligible to vote is so important, and then making a plan and following through with it. So thanks so much, Alex, for your insight. The next question is for Carly. Carly, tell us a moment in which you realized the importance of voting and civic engagement.
Absolutely. So I don't know if you mentioned this, so Sam and I are from the same city. So I'm from Parkland, Florida. So the year I turned 18 was the year we had the shooting at Stoneman Douglas. So that was, I think, a very watershed moment for a lot of people. So I was coming into the year I could vote at the same time when issues were directly impacting my community. So I think that really started off just how important voting was going to be. And at the same time, you saw this huge wave of civic engagement, especially led by youth. And there was this concern that it wasn't going to translate into votes. It did, there was a rise, but I think at the same time, it surprised people that you do see this huge wave of civic engagement, but it wasn't necessarily taking the traditional form of voting. So I think that was the first moment I realized just how important it was. And it, I think, led me down a path that made me really want to focus where that gap was and how we can really improve that voting number.
That was very well said, Carly, and you're absolutely right. Being in Parkland, living in Parkland, and being a youth leader in Parkland, we know that that was a tragedy that affected us way too close to home. And I know that our friends and almost everyone we knew came together behind a cause and saw it through. So that you're absolutely right, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. Aries is back with us, and so I'm going to give her a chance to introduce herself as well. Just a little bit of background. Aries is a youth commissioner in the city of Baltimore. She is the head of the Baltimore City Youth Voter Registration Committee, and she does incredible work. She was just on the local news in her city, and it was very amazing to see that as well. So, Aries, tell us about your advocacy, and the question that we're talking about is a moment in which you realized the importance of voting and civic engagement.
Of course. So hi, everyone. My name is Aries Prince. The main focus of my committee, the Baltimore City Voter Registration Committee, is not only to help kids get registered in the process of voter registration, but also offer civics education. Something I saw a lot of throughout Baltimore City is that people didn't really know where to start when it came to talking about voting and the process of that, and sort of understanding how to identify their local officials. I think the moment I sort of realized the importance of voting is just been throughout these few months in quarantine, and just seeing the major global issues that have occurred and seeing the mass protests. I think I really started to realize just how important and vital voting is, because the people in federal and local government are making these decisions who impact our lives. So yeah, I think that was really a turning point for me.
And speaking of the issues that are important to our generation and to our country moving forward, this next question is for you, Aries, as well. And of course, everyone can chime in and speak a little bit more, but what are the top 2 or 3 issues that are important to you? Aries, you can go first on this one.
So I'd say for me, definitely. Oh, okay. I'd say definitely for me, climate change and just human rights in general. I think looking at, what happened in Australia and California with the wildfires, and just being here in Baltimore City, and seeing just the difference in our climate change and how unpredictable it is. I think that's really important to me, as well as just basic human rights, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Very well said, and I'm glad that you brought those 2 issues to the forefront. Thank you. And I'm going to let Alex or Carly, if you want to jump in on that topic as well.
Sure, yeah, I'm pretty similar. I think my top 3 would be climate change, human rights, and then electoral reform as well. I find that interesting. Maybe it's because I enjoy policy, but I think electoral reform is also something I'm very interested in going forward.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I absolutely agree with the climate change. Obvious reasons, gun violence has been a pretty big one as well. And then I think given the past 6 months, healthcare, and especially the issues when you're trying to figure out what's the best way to get as many people access to healthcare in a crisis and beyond it.
That's a very good diverse slate of issues that our voters should pay close attention to in this election, because I think more and more our young voters are realizing, and all of our voters are realizing, that there really are these important issues on the ballot that are hidden but are represented by the different candidates and the different policies they represent. So I'm glad that you brought those issues to the forefront. Alex, you mentioned electoral reform, and I think the reason why that's become more and more prevalent and important is because of the loss of faith and trust in our institutions of government by our voters and by the citizens in our country. So this next question is for Carly, if you'd like to go first. Carly, how can we improve trust in our voting and our political systems?
That's a great question. I think a problem with it is there's not really one answer to it. I think it's been a systemic issue that unfortunately I think just keeps occurring, and you have this cycle where you think my vote is not going to matter because no matter who I vote for, you're going to get stuck with a Congress that's in gridlock, or you're going to not see the outcomes you want. I mean, I think in my opinion, the first step really is just getting involved with it and it's understanding how the system works. Not so much so you can accept the system as it is, but maybe so you can recognize where some of the faults are and where we're getting some of the issues wrong. Like you said, when you become a youth voter, when you start becoming a youth leader and you start investing in that community, you start playing a very active role in it. And then the changes that you want to see or that need to happen can start there. So from that perspective, for getting involved in whatever policy decision or governmental organization you want to, is a good place to start. Beyond that, obviously voting and actually enacting that reform. And unfortunately, that's going to be a pretty long problem. Like we don't have any next overnight issues that can be solved. But I think you've seen already the impact of having a lot of people suddenly aware of these really big issues and advocating them. And you're starting to see that there is no choice but to change them.
Getting involved in voting are two great answers, Carly, and I think that that is the root of the problem, and I think that you addressed it very well. I'm going to give Alex or Aries a chance to address this topic as well if they'd like to.
Yeah, sure. I think the systemic part that was mentioned was dead on. It tends to be a systemic issue. And so how do we change that? How do we fix that? It really does come down to voting. If people vote in overwhelming numbers, no matter who the party is for, there's bound to be changes that do change the way we do elections. For example, what I can think of right now is House Resolution 1, I believe, is set to have some election reform. And so voting in mass numbers, that could get that passed, and that could create a systematic change within the elections that we currently have across the nation. And so I think that's really the key, is getting people to vote through all the barriers there are, whether that's personal or, again, structural or systemic. That's, I think, really the key with this issue.
Of course, and I think both Carly and Alex, they made some really great points. I think also making sure that we're voting for the people we want to correctly represent us in government is super important too. And I think also sort of a bit of transparency as well. You know, it's hard to trust your government and build connections with them, you know, when they say one thing, but their actions are something else.
That's a really great point. And Aries, Carly, Aries, and I met through the United States Conference of Mayors Youth Task Force meeting. And I think that at the local level, we see more transparency, especially in our smaller communities. And so to bring that level of transparency across the nation is a great point, Aries. And then also voting and getting involved. Along those same lines, the last three panels that we've had, every time I've asked this question, we've gotten some great races and elections for our voters to do homework and pay attention to, but also see the incredible knowledge of our youth leaders when it comes to what's happening in their communities. This panel is special because it's our most geographically diverse. So Alex is in Iowa, Carly right now is in North Carolina, Aries is in Baltimore, I'm in Florida. So it's very geographically diverse, and I think that'll make it more interesting when I ask Alex this question first, and then I'll let Carly and Aries to contribute as well. Besides the presidential election and refraining from naming any candidates in particular, what are some races at the state or local level that you're paying close attention to?
Yeah, I'll start with Iowa. The state of Iowa has some really interesting races because there is a possibility of a power shift in the state house. So I'm keeping tabs on a few local state house races because there are some candidates who lost by literally a handful of votes. I think under 10 votes. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how that shapes out because that is a really unique situation. So I'll be paying attention to a lot of my local races here at home. I'm also going to be paying attention to the Iowa Senate race, which is also, again, home, but that's also a big race to determine who has power in the federal legislature in Congress. And then I'll probably keep tabs on a few interesting ones I find are Mississippi, the Senate race there, as well as Alaska, just in terms of campaign strategy and the varying demographics there. So I think those are really interesting for me out of all the races, but there are a ton of interesting races this year. And it could lead to a variety of different results come November 3rd or a week after November 3rd or whenever, things will be official. So there's definitely a lot of races to look into.
Those are some great races, Alex, that our voters can pay attention to. And you've definitely given me personally some races to do some homework on. So I appreciate that. Carly and Aries, would you like to jump in on any races in your communities as well?
I can go first. So I'm very interested in that. So I'm registered to vote in Florida, but where I go to school in North Carolina is also tends to have some pretty close races. So I will probably be checking out, especially some of the House races around there, just because depending on who turns out is literally going to make the difference on who ends up receiving the vote and gets the seat. As well as I'll do a quick plug. I love Florida has a couple interesting constitutional amendments on the ballot this year. So North Carolina's had a few of those too. So it's always very interesting to see what these amendments are proposing to do and the impacts they can have, were they or were they not to get passed.
It's a really great point to not only pay attention to the candidates, but also the amendments that are on the ballots too. Thanks, Carly. And Aries, if you'd like to share any races in your communities too.
Oh, for sure. I'm definitely looking forward to Baltimore City's mayoral election. We really do have a great and diverse in age between the different candidates, especially looking at our city council now. That's something I'm really, really excited for.
Well, thank you so much to the three of you for shining light on some of the local and statewide races in your communities and across the country, because I know that from the feedback we've gotten, your answers give the voters some research and homework to do and some exciting things to look up after this panel today. So I appreciate it, and I know that everyone tuning in appreciates it too. I'm going to address this next question to Aries, and of course, the three of you can chime in. But clearly, the three of you are very educated civically, and you have a good understanding of how policies and government works. And so the importance of civic education is vital. There's no doubt about it. The question is, how can we increase civic education, whether it's through our schools or other programs? What can we do to further increase civic education? And Aries, if you'd like to go first on this one.
Of course, I think sort of number one, it starts with having the correct access to resources. Just here looking in Baltimore City, there's definitely a real divide between schools. Some schools teach civics education while others don't. Like, for example, I go to Baltimore City College and I had a civics education class in my freshman year. And I think also getting young adults engaged through social media, which is something, we all are frequent to, is an important way too, but definitely access to resources. And not only that, but trusted source information that comes directly from your government. I think that there's a lot of different information out there about civics education. And I understand that process of learning can be difficult and complicated. And just having something simplified and straightforward for young adults to understand is really important.
It's very well said, and I'm glad that you related that back to your community and what you're seeing at that level, because that's so important to hear that perspective and how civics can really shape our minds and how we think about the world. So that's a great answer. And Carly or Alex, if you'd like to jump in on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a little biased. I'll argue speech and debate was one of the main forms that I ended up getting exposed to civic education for, because it went beyond just teaching me about the issues. It made me have to actually find the research on them and then pick a side and fight for it. So that's something that we're working on in our community, but it's an event and it's a skill set that I don't think is widely taught, or if it is, it's almost an afterthought. And then I just want to echo what Eric said. The format of civic education for youth especially, I think, is changing. She mentioned social media. That's extremely important as well. But also, I think there's this misconception that youth don't care about civic education, or they need to almost be spoon-fed it. And I think we've clearly disproved it. So it's not even just a matter of ensuring everyone has the access to civic education and that we're communicating it the right way, but it's transforming what civic education is. Because we know now that everyone wants to be engaged, just a matter of finding the ways that students want to personally or individually choose what to support and how to really engage in it.
And that's a great point. And Alex, I know that through Key Club, many of the students get a good civic education by working with Kiwanis International and understanding how the communities work. So tell us a little bit about what you see there and how we can increase civic education beyond that too, from your lens.
Yeah, so I mean, students definitely get a hands-on experience when it comes to being engaged in their communities, specifically through service, volunteerism, and leadership. And so that's a huge part of the organization and something we've been prompting for, 95 years since the organization has been a thing. But I think there's also room to grow. And that's something we've been trying to do, is because if these students are so engaged in their community, they also should be engaged. They should also be engaged in civics and education and things like that, specifically in relation to government. And so we've been trying to roll out some just certificate programs and things like that about voting and the importance of about how government works and how those things kind of lead to change. And so that's been a really big project we've been working on. And I think that's important. And then I just to echo kind of some of the conversation earlier, I think it's a mix of ease of access of resources. The accessibility is huge, which is something that my organization is trying to do as we kind of take this civic role. And then also the next really big thing is dialogue, which I think Carly hit really well, is dialogue is so important, especially among our generation. That seems to be one of the ways that we kind of communicate about civics and also get others involved and get engaged in civic education.
Really well said from the three of you. And it's so important that we do everything we can to create civic education opportunities for everyone. I think, yes, for our young voters, but everyone across an intergenerational spectrum. It's of the utmost importance, and I hope that through the avenues we've discussed today, it will happen. I also know that through the organizations that each of you are a part of, like Carly, you spoke about speech and debate, Alex, Key Club, Aries through the Youth Voter Registration Committee, you're doing that and you're encouraging civic education. And so that should be commended as well. The next topic that I want to discuss is polarization in our politics. Around the dinner table in some families, talking about politics has become taboo. But the truth is that politics and the way that our government works is part of our everyday life. So how can we decrease polarization in our politics and have compassionate civil discourse with those that we may not agree with? And so I'll let Carly go first on that question.
No, that's another fantastic question that has, again, been a systematic issue. I think just in the way politics makes us and the way we engage with information now, it almost forces you to choose a side. And then you then take this view going forward that if it's not my side, you're trying to prove me wrong. And it's this fight, there's no real winner, because if you guys can't admit that there's some kind of compromise, you just want to entirely avoid it. I will, again, echo, I think debate and kind of changing the format in which you engage is a first step you can take to try to end that polarization. I think a lot of it, though, does have to come, I think, from internal government reform. Unfortunately, the way it works right now is it's very separated. It's almost, especially federal politics, is it's its own little bubble. And it's very, very difficult, I think, when you're with those types of stakes to be able to choose somewhere in the middle and not have that reflect poorly on you, because at this point we've almost decided if you break from your party, it's almost a death sentence for your political career. So it's changing both how we do it at home and then also how we do it in government.
Yeah, and I think something we've seen emerge the past couple decades is the technology, social media. And I was actually having a conversation with, this is not me trying to flex, but also trying to flex, former Senator Bill Nelson from Florida, which you guys might be familiar with. I actually got to sit down with him, which was super cool. But he was kind of talking about just how it didn't used to be the way it was with partisanship. And don't get me wrong, it has been much worse than it is currently. Back when a senator was almost caned on the floor for having a different opinion in the 1800s. That was a thing that almost happened. So we're not quite at that point. But what you're seeing with this emergence of tech and social media is these algorithms are just essentially running an echo chamber. And when that happens, people are getting more and more into their specific ideology and party, and it's getting harder and harder to pull them back out to see other people's perspectives. And so that has caused this really massive sense of tribalism in the United States, where people just kind of flock to their party or their candidate, and it's really hard to get across to their side. And that's on every single side of the aisle. It's not a one-party issue. It's in every person, every party issue. And so I think that's really contributed to it. And how do we fix that? I think there is a lot that needs to happen systemically. Again, totally agree. And I think also for us just to be aware that that is happening, that these algorithms are running and purposely giving us this information because they want our likes and they want our data and things like that. And us being aware of that can help solve this issue of partisanship, I think.
Alex, you said it perfectly about the echo chambers and that we're just getting fed the same information along the same lines in which we believe. And so, Aries, if you want to, expand on that a little bit more about the echo chamber and how misinformation can be avoided, and also getting the right information from all perspectives and not just one lens is important, and how we can do that.
Of
Aries,
course, I think what we're doing right now being I think what we're doing right now, being together and having meaningful conversations about, our different viewpoints and the things that we connect on or maybe don't connect on is really important for bipartisanship. But also sort of in letting people sort of make their own decisions and have their own viewpoints and things like that is vital.
That's true, and I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation so far until the end in a respectful way and compassionately, because that's the way that it has to happen across the country. One thing that I know that is important is that if we do disagree with someone, we can find common ground away from policy. The number one way that someone identifies themselves is not going to be their political affiliation. It'll be where they're from or who their parents are or something more simple. So we can find common ground about what city we were from or our favorite TV show rather than what we think about a certain issue or another. And so finding that common ground, having those conversations, and getting away from the echo chambers are incredible points. I'm glad you brought them up. And so the next question is for Alex. And this question, I would love to hear everyone's perspective because it can be applied in so many ways. Alex, if you can pass any piece of policy or legislation that you can come up with based on an issue that's important to you, what would that be? And of course, we just talked about bipartisanship. So something that can be passed maybe in a bipartisan manner.
That is a really good question, and also a shockingly difficult question. There are so many things, and so I might think of this later and wish I picked something else, but I'm gonna go back to election reform, which I know I talked about, but the way I see that, again, there are so many issues that I equally would like to pass, but with this, as we are seeing, especially this election, attempts of voter suppression, which I actually experienced myself. One reason I didn't vote by mail was because they denied it and they said, you have to reapply. And I said, nope, voting in person now. that needs to be reformed. Money in politics needs to be reformed. Ranked choice voting, things like that, I believe should happen. And when we do that, I think it's going to become a more representative democracy. And in turn, by doing that, then a lot of the policies that I personally like to pass, but I think a majority of America would like to pass, can actually pass. And I think that's huge. And so that's why I'm saying a specific bill related to electoral reform, election reform, is going to be my kind of answer to if I could pass anything, which was a fantastic question.
Well, it's definitely not an easy question. And so you got to go first, Alex, and maybe Carly and Aries, you had more time to think about what your response will be. So are either one of you wanting to take a jump at it and talk about what policy that would be for you? How about Aries, you look ready.
Sure. I don't know. I have to say that's a really hard one. I think Alex really hit the nail right on the head with voter suppression, and making sure that people have sort of equal access to the voting polls, is really important. But I don't know. I honestly can't really think of one right now.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. And I think Alex addressed an issue of all issues in a sense, is that if we can find easier avenues for people to vote, then that will solve a lot of the other issues that are there. So I think that's a multifaceted challenge, and you addressed that really well. And Carly, let's see if you have something that would be interesting.
You know what? I will take a page from Alex and do legislation that I think we need to get reform, and then mention a few pieces that I'd love to see once we get that reform. So I absolutely agree. I think electoral reform is one of the key functions you need to fix before you can start. So I'll go actually with campaign finance reform, and maybe laws that would work on strengthening that. We talked earlier about the issue with polarization, and I think they're intertwined. If you are relying on so much on finances that you need to say a specific line in order to achieve the most amount of money, I think you end up alienating a lot of the people and specifically targeting the people who would give you the most amount of money. And I think that just fundamentally violates what a democracy and what civic engagement should be. So that would be how we should probably start to fix it. And then I think there's just a lot of policies that we're now looking at. I'm in college, so education and debt relief would be on the top of my list. Gun violence issues that are just common sense ones that aren't a matter of one side or the other, but just how do we make sure everyone who has a gun is safe for themselves and for others would be another big one. But it's a very hard question, because how do you, when you're looking at all of the issues, just pick one?
That's a really good point, Carly, and I think that you address some good ones when you talk about gun violence and the effect that has. We definitely need gun safety reforms, and so that's a great point as well. And I think this theme of making sure that we can talk about and come up with solutions to voter suppression is something that is so important. And so not only in this election, because this election is ongoing and we've maybe passed the point, but for the future, what are your thoughts on the primary systems? What are your thoughts on the way in which we can reform our voting? And what is the future in that sense? Alex, you talked about new ways of voting, but just recently, and there's a talk about moving voting digitally. So what are some of the things that we're going to see coming up? And how can we gauge whether those solutions are applicable in our democratic society or something that would maybe be a harm? And I'll let Aries take the first push at this question.
Of course. So I think just right off the bat, starting with the negatives, I think everything we've seen so far, we really need to hold our government accountable. And I know that's sort of broad to say that in a sense, but just looking at everything that has happened so far, on the Supreme Court and things like that, we really need to hold them accountable, but also making sure that we have the correct systems and policies to do that. It starts at both, a local level, but also at the federal. There needs to be some sort of sort of balance in between to, make sure that we're having fair elections and our government is being, fair and equitable.
It's really well said, and I think that being aware of the challenges that will come in our way in our future when we talk about the reforms that need to be put in place is really important. Carly or Alex, would you like to jump in on this topic?
Sure, I could absolutely jump in. I think one of the things I was really looking at this summer and into this year is you're going to see a rapid increase in vote by mail, especially for this election because of COVID-19, which I think is going to be a pretty big departure. So I know all of us, I think, whenever we have an election, we'll just like stay glued to the screen to see when we're gonna see they're gonna call it. And I think that kind of instant we're calling it in the next, like on election night, may not happen just because of the amount of work you're gonna have to take to count mail-in ballots. But I think another thing that's going to be very important is elections do, in terms of how they're conducted, vary dramatically by states. So and that's not necessarily a bad thing because every state is different. Every state has to consider what its geography looks like, what's the best way for its citizens to vote. But I think there's some basic policies that I think states are just going to need to accept. One of them is when you're going to accept the ballot by. So for many of us, we're very lucky. If you submit a ballot by mail, given say 2 weeks, it's a generally good bet that they're going to receive it. But in a lot of rural areas or for people who live maybe on reservations, it takes weeks for these mail-in ballots to be received. And in cases where it was mailed by the appropriate date, it should be counted. But in a lot of states, there's policies that they'll restrict when they receive them. So even if they're mailed by the correct date, if they're received a week after, it's void. And I think those are the things we're going to actually probably catch in this election. And if it goes accordingly, should be fixed going forward.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for me, and I'm guessing all of us here, is that a vote should equal one person. And I think that's something, a philosophy that I've really kind of been carrying throughout this entire election is things like this may be kind of controversial, but the Senate, for example, when you have senators who are representing millions of people less on one side than the other, it calls into question, is this really representative of, the American democracy? Same with, the Electoral College. Is that really, is everybody in California really the same as everybody in Wyoming? And currently, at least based on the statistical differences, not really, no. And so I think that's some of the changes we need to see. How we go about that, I think that is up to interpretation. But I think we really need to focus on making sure that every person's vote counts and that it's equal. And that's something I'd love to see going forward. And then again, I'd also like to just see making sure that it is easy to vote and accessible. I'm from Iowa, and if you remember the Iowa caucuses, that was interesting this year, to say the least. And also, if you look at caucus turnout versus just primary turnout, when you just drop a ballot in a box or vote normally, that caucus turnout tends to be lower because you have to be there. It takes more time, and so we also need to analyze, especially in primaries, is this the best way to do it? Is this the most representative of the people? And I think those two pieces of, as everybody getting the same, as everybody's vote count the same, and just prioritizing people. That's, I think, what we really need to do going forward.
Thus far, the three of you have given us incredible insight on the voting issues and what we're dealing with as a country, but also how we need to move forward. We talked a little bit before we started, and I think all of you know that you're inspirational to me and you're inspirational to the communities in which you serve. And so for that, you deserve a major kudos. And so I know that a lot of our audience wants to learn more about you. And I want to make sure that we talk about what you're working on and how our country can support you, because you represent our generation and the best of our generation. And so starting with Carly, and we'll have everyone address it, but what's next? So you've done incredible work up till now. What is the next thing that you're thinking of working on, and how can we support you?
All right, another great and not easily answered question. So, yeah, I mean, actually, it's funny because what I'm actually studying or researching right now is that question of what's next. So, I mean, I came of age with this rise of civic engagement with youth. And I mean, I grew up and I still believe that that should equate to the change. So maybe if you lose faith in government, maybe if you lose faith in individuals who you've put in charge, that it's that movement or force that could change. So I'm currently researching what the long-term impacts are for people who start off as youth civic engagement and how that transforms as they go through life. For me, I mean, my goal is to practice law. I'd love to get to defend and fight for the rights that I'm studying right now. I think civic engagement is more than just one form of activism or one form of engagement. So I'd love to get to be, I think, have that opportunity to work in different fields and in different ways to really find out what happens next and how we can go about making sure that that never really dies down and if anything gets stronger.
And Carly, I think you would be an incredible in the field of law and or anything that you pursue. And I know that you're going to continue to do great work civically in whatever you decide to do. And we're all here to support each of you. So thanks so much. Alex or Aries, if you'd like to go next on that one.
Yeah, I can go. In the next few months, college applications are my fun project. So your moral support is appreciated there. But on kind of a more serious note, I think I don't know exactly how it's going to materialize, just because, like I said, I will probably end up going to college and things will change. But it's probably going to be centered around youth because we are an underrepresented population, and that's something I want to continue advocating for. And so I don't know how it's going to materialize, but the way that everyone watching can help me is to continue to advocate for youth. If you are a young person, continue to advocate for yourself, no matter if that is legislative advocacy, if that's personal advocacy, if it's advocacy within your home, school, community, whatever it may be. I think that's just one of the biggest things that you can do for me, but also for yourself, and really all of us young people, as we try to be represented, really. And that's what it comes down to. So I urge you and encourage you to fight to make sure that you and me and all of us are represented.
Alex, that was great, and you're absolutely right in that we need to make sure that all of our youth are represented and that they advocate for themselves, and we have great youth advocacy from leaders like yourself. And I can also say on a personal note is that you've left a legacy besides that too. Each of you have, but I know from the work that you've done that you've left a great legacy and will continue to do that through everything that you encounter. And personally, I know that I can't wait to see all of the steps that each of you take. So thank you so much, Alex. And Aries, what's next for you? What are you planning to do?
Oh, of course. I think with my committee, throughout this process of the election, we've really focused on helping get young kids registered to vote. But I think in terms after that, we still want to continue to push civics education and resources as much as we can, while also hosting daily Instagram Lives with our local representatives. I know this week we got to speak to our councilman of Baltimore City, and just continuing to make those connections and relationships between our local and city government and young kids and young adults.
That's amazing. So Aries, how can we tune into those Instagram Lives?
Of course, so you can find them on our Instagram, at BCYVRC. We usually do them on Wednesdays around 7 p.m. And also make sure to stay tuned for any updates we have on our Instagram.
I know I'll be there, Aries, and that's a really great opportunity. I know that when you get to interview the leaders in your community, you get to bridge the community and the leaders together. So that is great civic engagement and great work by all of you across the board. And so the $1 million question is next. And I want to preface it by saying that I think the answer to this question is an absolutely, seeing what each of you have said so far and as a result of your leadership and programs like this. But I'm going to let Alex go first on this question. Will we be able to activate the youth vote?
Yes. And actually, turnout right now for young people is through the roof, especially compared to last election in 2016. It's not a question of will we have. It's just can we break that the ceiling with it. And I hope we can. I think we can. But we are seeing just sky high numbers this year. And so that's super exciting. But I guess going forward, I think we can continue to do this as long as we keep getting youth engaged through projects and programs like this. But we have, and hopefully we will.
It's incredibly exciting to hear that, because from the first panel, the answer has been yes, but not as enthusiastic as now, because we have seen already through vote by mail and early voting that our youth are getting out the vote. But I still ask the question so we can talk about how great our youth are. Carly or Aries, if you want to expand a little bit more on that topic.
I mean, I think Alex said it really, really well. He's right. Our numbers are sky high. I think we've done it already. I mean, the youth vote is activated. I agree. I think it's just a matter of keeping it going. I think a big issue with any movement, any organization is when you've reached the goal, what comes next? So I think that just needs to be the next focus. We've voted, we've hopefully put the people in office who we trust to bring about the change and reforms that we desperately need. But now what happens after? In what way, I guess, does civic education or engagement change now that it's no longer on a vote, but it's kind of open to what do you are passionate for, or what do you want to pursue? And I don't think there's one specific way of doing it, which means there's not one way of measuring it. So it's going to be very much a kind of responsibility on everyone's part as to how do we keep that youth vote going.
It's really well said. And Aries, not only have we activated the youth vote clearly, but how can we sustain that progress for years to come?
Of course, I think just continuing to stay engaged in what's going on in your local government and state government, and continuing to constantly educate yourself on what's going on. Pay attention to what's happening in the news, pay attention to what's happening with elections. But I think Carly and Alex really did a great job. So yes, we can activate the youth vote 100%.
Amazing. That's music to my ears, and I know that our audience is as excited as we are about that. And so the question now going forward is going to change from will we be able to activate the youth vote to how do we continue to activate all votes? And I just love to hear that. And so as we're coming to the end of our program, first of all, it has been such a pleasure hosting the three of you. You are incredible youth minds, you're incredible youth leaders, and I know you will continue to be great leaders. I want to give each of you a chance to deliver concluding remarks and some energy and mobilizing voters who maybe still haven't made a plan to vote. So your concluding remarks about that and how we're going to move forward as a generation. And so I'm going to let Aries go first on this one.
Gosh, moving forward, that's a tough one. But I'd say, for anyone out there who hasn't voted yet, please do. I hope that, you find a candidate who really connects with your own ideals and values. And I hope that you continue to stay engaged. But yeah, and also thank you so much, Sinan, for having us. This has been really great. And I've gotten a lot of insight and just new information from my fellow panelists. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, and I really hope that the three of us can continue working together even beyond this. And I think that there is potential for that. So I really do appreciate your time and for being here and sharing your insight as well. Carly, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, so I just want to echo what Eric said. I mean, we've seen just how important this election is in everything we do. And I think the fact that we're all quarantined at home and just constantly thinking about it just kind of demonstrates how important it is to get out to vote this time. So whether it's if you can still vote by mail, or whether early voting or on election day, this matters, and it clearly impacts us in every way. So absolutely, please vote if you can. Please go out and vote. But I mean, kind of some energy going forward. So I think for me, it's just been all evidence that youth are special form of engaged. They always have been. And if anything, they've just grown more over the past few years. I remember everyone used to lament how the youth don't care, or youth don't believe in it, or don't do anything. That's just clearly been proven false. So we do engage. I think it's a matter of in what ways do we engage now? Because I think we are usually the ones who are at the forefront of transforming what engagement looks like. So I think maybe an energizing movement would be, you are engaged. You, in fact, probably feel more of a pressure than anyone else to engage, but choose to pursue something that you really care about and do it in a way that makes you love it. So it doesn't necessarily need to be one form of engagement, aside from voting, that it's one size fits all, but it can be something that you love to do, and it shouldn't be a responsibility so much as a passion.
That was incredibly well said, Carly. And you're absolutely right. Our youth are leading the way. I also just want to recognize, while I can, that there are so many who are fighting and have fought for our right to vote. And I just want to recognize those, like our military and our first responders. And so it really is our civic responsibility, and in some ways an obligation to fulfill it. Alex, our final push before Election Day, no pressure, it's all in your hands. Your words of encouragement for our youth and for all of our voters.
Yeah, well, I'll start by thank you, Sinan, for kind of organizing this and all the work you've done to get out the vote. I just wanted to start by, congratulating you and spotlighting you. But when it comes to getting out the vote and the importance of the vote, if you want to see what we've been talking about the entire night, which is systemic structural change, that's a reason to vote. If you want to see yourself represented in Congress, that is another reason to vote. If you want to participate in your fundamental right that people have literally fought for, that is why you need to vote. And so I think it really does come down to that. If you want change, or even if you don't want change, you need to vote, because that's what your vote does, and it's just so utterly important. And vote for the people who can't, for various reasons, and I think that's really important. And I'll also add too, we determine the election. I mean, based on how things are going, it looks like youth are going to determine who wins the elections all across the United States. So we really do matter, and we really do decide the outcome, and that's another huge reason to vote. Even if you don't have very strong opinions on candidates, if you do have an opinion, if you have done a little bit of research, then you should exercise that right, because you very well could be the difference between the people who are in office. I think Carly nailed it with going forward. What are we going to do? And I think it's just to be engaged, stay engaged throughout the next coming decades, no matter who you are, where you are, how old you are. I think find a form of engagement in relation to civics and try to stick with it. Try to find a way you can stay interested in it. And I think that is just vital. But again, if you want to see change, if you want to see structural reform, please vote, especially this election. And if you can't do it now, if you're not 18 yet, next election, do it in 2022, 2024, 2026, 2028, it doesn't matter. But make sure you register and make sure you vote.
That was a great last push, Alex, and to all of you, I can't thank you enough. That was incredible concluding remarks and incredible insight throughout the night. You inspire me, you inspire our nation. You're the best of our generation, and you're leading the way forward. I can't thank you enough. On behalf of all of us watching today, we can't thank you enough. And for our audience, continue to support these youth leaders. They're doing great things in their communities, and they're going to continue doing great things. I just want to mention that we are going to have a post-election panel next Saturday to talk about everything that happens. That will be featuring Hunter Pollock, Stephen Muncie, and Ariel Arias. And that will also be at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Facebook Live. Tune in. For all of our panel discussions, they're all uploaded on YouTube. If you look up Activate the Youth Vote, maybe easy if you look up my name, Sinan Qasim, and you'll see all of the panels there as well. Again, thank you so much to everyone who's tuning in. Thank you for voting in advance. And I can't wait to see the impact that our youth continue to make for the future. Thank you so much, and have a great night.